In the world of basketball, trends come and go that come and change an entire generation of basketball players in the United States. Sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. Of course, the first major one I can think of was Allen Iverson popularizing shifty dribble moves and fashion in the NBA that literally had the NBA change its rules on game day attire and had kids wanting to dribble the ball like AI. In the 2010s, it was all about shooting from long range like Curry that changed the NBA meta as a whole and had the younger generation wanting to be like him and shooting from long range. And in both of these cases, you can see the NBA itself change due to these trend setters. You can even say the same about other players wanting to imitate their favorite players as a kid, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, and others. But in the 2020s, one thing I know that reigns supreme is the surge of social media and its effect on the basketball world itself, or at least in the United States. And that's what I want to talk to you about today on the Alvini Linguine channel, where we talk about things all interesting basketball with your boy Alvini Linguine. Because after a few clips went viral last month, I think it's finally time to discuss something I have been very quiet about for the longest time, at least on my YouTube channel. And now I have an excuse to talk about it, as the question itself have been brought up again. So if that sounds like something you want to learn more about, be sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the video, and be sure to like the video for more like these. Now, you already know who it is. Roll it!
3, 2, 1.
Weights in the weight room, so he stitched up in the left. He's doing all this.
So as I said in the intro, this conversation was started from a few viral tweets and posts on the internet that really had people discussing, has social media really have gone too far when it comes to the sport of basketball? I've always had this opinion and even spoke out on it with a certain someone that OG viewers on this channel know about, and made a video 2 years ago where I talked about the surge of characters in the basketball social media sphere rather than the promotion of actual worthy prospects. But before we go further, just take a look at this clip from a podcast appearance by Austin Rivers to get some context on what we'll be discussing today.
Little things in basketball are forgotten now, and they're not appreciated. And it's like a trickle effect, even to like the analytics of numbers and stuff. Like certain guys don't get paid what they value in basketball, what kids think are cool. I'm gonna try to make this as sweet as possible, because this really does bother me. I talk about this all the time. When I played in high school, you only got a mixtape if you were like a top tier guy. Back then, like, you had to put in work, like consistent work, build a name for yourself to get a mixtape. And it was like an honor to have a Ball is Life mixtape. It was an honor to have a Hoop mixtape. We didn't play to have one though. I didn't go into a game doing something to be on Hoop mixtape. I went into the game to win and just be myself. And Hoop mixtape and them were there following me. I didn't ask Hoop mixtape to come follow me. I didn't pay Hoop mixtape $1. I didn't pay Ball is Life $1. They just followed me because I was that guy. They followed Brad Beal because he was that guy. They followed this guy because he was that guy. That's how it was. The landscape has changed now. Parents are paying these people to come to games. Everyone gets a mixtape. Everyone looks at the camera now and taps on their head when they dunk on someone. And it's all highlight after highlight after highlight. And now only kids watch highlights. They don't watch the actual basketball game, the purity of the game. Making a hockey pass, which means making the right pass. Even though you're not going to get an assist, you're driving to make a play so someone else can make the play to get an assist. Diving on the floor, talking on defense, playing defense at all, shooting good shots, making the game easy, being efficient with basketball, and scoring off 1 or 2 dribbles rather than 15 dribbles. This whole thing, and I only named like 12. There's 50 of them, has been forgotten about in basketball. And you're seeing it with some of these guys that come in the NBA. And I can name you names, but I'm not going to. That come into the NBA and have all the talent in the world, but like they need to be taught basketball, because like this is what basketball is now. Like highlight culture has absolutely, it has killed the game of basketball.
So there you have it. Austin Rivers went on a 2-minute tirade explaining on how the use of social media and promotion of the wrong things through it has had a trickle effect into the entire basketball sphere as we know it. And some of the complaints he made you can probably think about in your everyday basketball life for the people who you even play with. But people weren't convinced at all, with the top comment referring to his time in the NBA in his younger years being exactly an example of what he was talking about. But the straw that broke the camel's back that really got people to consider what Austin Rivers was talking about as the truth was another clip that was uploaded by Overtime, one of the biggest basketball social media giants out there. And all I can say is it's rather interesting. Now, there will be either two types of reactions to this. One that'll be like, who cares? And the other being like, what the hell? And for me, this is what exactly I am talking about. This is where the fall of basketball in the United States starts from and becomes a lot more prevalent. And it's in the 2020s decade with the rise of social media. Now, again, I've already mentioned how other trends and trailblazers in basketball have had their own changes in the sphere of basketball, but you can also argue that it did more good for the sport than bad in its own way. Allen Iverson's dribbling bravado in the NBA brought more guards who knew how to get things done on their own and started the trend to where the NBA slowly became more guard oriented rather than big man oriented like we see today. Stephen Curry took shooting in the NBA to a whole nother level in the US and in the NBA with his logo threes and precision at the 3-point line. And let's not forget the type of threes he'd also take. But what I want to talk about is the advantages and disadvantages that social media provides to the sport of basketball in the United States, and highlight and explain the points Austin Rivers made in this clip with as much evidence towards my and his claim as possible, while of course hearing your thoughts. But let's first start off with his first point in that video.
Little things in basketball are forgotten now, and they're not appreciated. And it's like a trickle effect, even to like the analytics of numbers and stuff. Like certain guys don't get paid what they value in basketball, what kids think of.
Now this one, I believe everyone can agree on unanimously. The little things in basketball start to become more and more not taught about nowadays and less appreciated. And that could definitely be highlighted in the NBA with new prospects coming into the NBA today. In the days of old, everyone played defense as it was just the game at the time. Hard-nosed basketball was expected from everybody, no matter if you couldn't play defense at all, no matter your height, no matter your vitals, didn't matter. But nowadays, the only people you really see play defense are the people who are designated to do so, like an Alex Caruso or Lou Dort, who were brought up out of the G League and got full-time contracts due to it, or the superstars who leveled up themselves into a status like a Jason Tatum. But overall, defense isn't something that is valued at all, and it's starting to affect the current age of basketball we see now. Now, I can already imagine people will mention the new age of offenses that is meant to space out teams and not allow super effective defense to be played, but there are teams in the NBA like the Heat and the Cavaliers who specialize in locking teams up. Defense is all about effort at the end of the day, and players nowadays would rather put in their effort in their offensive game than all around, and it feeds into the highlight culture of today. When people can get paid to strictly play defense in the NBA because the rest of the team won't even put effort into doing it themselves, that ain't a good look for you at all. For example, going back to Lou Dort, for the people who don't remember his story in the NBA, he was an undrafted college player who got a two-way contract with the Thunder and then got signed by them before the bubble. And his sole job was to lock up James Harden in the playoffs. And he almost got the job done too, but as we all know, the end of that story.
Dort for three, blocked by Harden. Dort got it back, tried to throw it off Harden, and missed him.
Again, defense is all about effort, but again, defense and other things are now a lost art, and it's all about the glitz, the glamour, the dunks, the deep threes, the celebrations, etc., etc. But to go further into this, Austin Rivers goes further into this point without even realizing it. Later in that video, he mentioned how he didn't want to name names because that would cause potential controversy, but he actually already did that. So let's bring up what will show more evidence that all-around basketball is starting to lose its footing in America. In January 9th of this year, after a game versus the Houston Rockets, Austin Rivers told pressers that he wasn't very impressed with the backcourt duo in Houston of Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., as he was quoted to say, "Someone needs to teach KPJ and Jalen how to play basketball the right way." You know what I mean? They need those vets, and I like those guys. They're super talented. They can really score. They need someone to help them out take that next step. And I'm sure you've heard plenty of young players nowadays be described like that in that same way. But let's focus on the example of today, Jalen Green and KPJ, as examples of Austin Rivers would describe to be a part of the problem. Jalen Green coming into the NBA has all types of talent to do whatever he wanted to on the court. He's fast enough to make drives in the paint, athletic enough to live above the rim, and make defensive plays if he wanted to. The potential for him was limitless, which is why people tokened him to be a D-Wade type clone, except a better shooter because of the modern age. But all we've seen thus far in these 2 seasons is just more and more of the same old. And I know it's only been 2 seasons, but just like Austin Rivers says, I too hope that he gets put into the right hands and molded into a good all-around player. But I think KPJ is simply just a run-of-the-mill scorer being used in the wrong way. KPJ came into the league as a scorer. Again, people for some reason compared him to James Harden, and he went to the Rockets to become one of the worst playmakers in the NBA. And of course, everyone can do anything in basketball with enough work, but taking a simple look at a simple 1.5 assist to turnover ratio can show that he has a lot of work to do if he expects to stay in the league as a point guard rather than his natural position as a wing. But I think a person who was able to grow past those allegations of just being potential and that's it was of course Andrew Wiggins, who was hailed to be the next superstar of his draft, but fizzled out after years of disappointment, but being able to rekindle his use in the league with the Golden State Warriors and winning a championship with them. That's the exact type of thing Austin Rivers is talking about with Jalen Green and KPJ. Just a mentor in the league like a Steve Kerr and the Golden State Warriors organization to help them mature and become better basketball players, not just scorers and that's it. But that will only get you so far in the league. It goes the same way for any other player who's coming in with that same skill set. Get highlights, get buckets. It's about a dime a dozen skill in the NBA. But what can you do to stay around in the league? But as Austin Rivers says, there are plenty of NBA players who are affected by this movement and are changing basketball for the worse. And I'm sure you, the viewer, can think of plenty of examples of that sort of behavior that will only push us further into less and less genuine basketball.
I played in high school. You only got a mixtape if you were like a top tier guy. Back then, like you had to put in work, like consistent work, build a name for yourself to get a mixtape. And it was like an honor to have a Ball is Life mixtape. It was an honor to have a Hoop mixtape. We didn't play to have one though. I didn't go into a game doing something to be on Hoop mixtape. I went into the game to win and just be myself. And Hoop mixtape and them were there following me. I didn't ask Hoop mixtape to come follow me. I didn't pay Hoop mixtape $1. I didn't pay Ball is Life $1. They just followed me because I was that guy. They followed Brad Beal because he was that guy. They followed this guy because he was that guy. That's how it was. The landscape has changed now. Parents are paying these people to come to games. Everyone gets a mixtape. Everyone looks at the camera now and taps on their head when they dunk on someone. And it's all highlight after highlight after highlight. And now only kids watch highlights. They don't watch the actual basketball game, the purity of the game.
Now, this one I have personal history with because Lord knows I do not like highlight culture in the slightest. But the point he made on this only reminded me of how rampant the anyone can get a mixtape point he made out to be absolutely true. But back before all these mixtape companies came out, like he said, you had to be the top of the top for these companies to come and record your games. As a reminder, Austin Rivers was a top 3 prospect in the 2011 high school class with guys like Bradley Beal and Anthony Davis. No one just received a mixtape. You earned it for being one of the best. But nowadays, the entire landscape has completely changed. Now any type of 3-star or lower recruit can get a sliver of attention if they are extraordinary some sort of way, or if they're able to give these companies views in some sort of fashion, whether it be their quirks, the way they play on the court, or just over exaggerating, which we all know is definitely a trend nowadays. But before we get into why I can't stand this practice, I wanted to go further into what he said about people paying for these companies to come to their games, because it is a real thing. Remember the video I showed you earlier about the 3rd graders playing basketball and how that got put on overtime itself? I decided to look onto their website to see how much their services cost for what they called exposure, and after acting like I was interested, there was an automatic $100 mixtape base fee and even more charges added for how much footage you was going to send, or even more for them to come record you. So Austin Rivers was not lying at all when he said that people actually go about doing these things to pay for their kids to get exposure through these outlets. And as you can imagine, and I don't want to sound like one of those people, but that does slightly take away from the hardworking high school athletes out there who don't have the same opportunities as them to be able to throw money at a company with the hope for exposure somewhere, somehow. But with that comes in the next step above this, and it's the cameras in the faces of these teenagers. Just like in the thumbnail, you see 2 people who are the faces of that at one point, and it was Mikey Williams and Jalen Green. But let's start with the one who we haven't talked about yet, Mikey Williams. As far as I can remember, Mikey Williams has been all over the internet as a star basketball phenom at a young age. Highlights everywhere, on every part of the internet, endorsements, whatever you can think of. And it all started from his basketball play in even middle school. Ever since he was in middle school, you can see this kid be everywhere, dominating his peers, and with that came notoriety and basically celebrity status off of his highlights. But even himself fell victim to the culture in a small way. Due to his genetic advantage and looking like a whole grown-ass man compared to his class, he easily shot up his class, at one point being the #1 recruit of his class and staying there for a good bit. But just think of where all that took him. Getting videos from every major sporting media company like A Ball is Life in Overtime with day in the life videos about him, a shoe deal with Puma in 2021, making him the first high schooler to ever get one with a major shoe brand, already getting NIL deals from all over, and crazy enough for me, since I don't keep up with all this stuff in the first place, which also took me off guard when I saw this, a whole NBA 2K commercial. But this all goes back to the LeBron James scenario and debate about when he was in high school, getting endorsements and looks all over the country to do many things, and was even caught on a few occasions accepting small booster gifts. But with LeBron James being a literal one-of-a-kind talent, he was able to accept all of this and still be at the top of his class unanimously. But with Mikey Williams, it just seems like the more and more he garnered deals, the more and more he slipped down the ranks. In his senior season right now in high school, he went from being on top of the world to the 34th rated prospect, which is no hit on him at all. He is still a top prospect, but compared to others, he obviously fell down the ranks as others grew themselves and garnered more notoriety. And it also adds on due to him getting his enrollment to Memphis this next year, which has an interesting reputation ever since Petty Hardaway has taken over. But again, you can see the absolute parallel of differences between when he was younger, getting all this stuff, and then when he gets a little bit older, other people start taking more of a rise. Now his reputation starts to look a little bit lower and lower, taking a deal to Memphis. But I hope him the best, as after doing some research, Memphis has a lot of graduates this year, so that'll probably give him more time and opportunities to take over to potentially go into the NBA. But my point is, as you can see, when you get to the top very early, these companies will come after you and make you a product as early as they can get your hands on you and as early as your parents allow it to happen. But that's the American way, I guess. Raising your children through sports to make a profit off said child through social media. But what about when the opposite happens? In Mikey's same high school class, another prospect whose father learned from his mistakes and would not let that happen to his son as he's going down the same #1 path. And that prospect is DJ Wagner and his dad, DeJuan Wagner, who himself was the #1 prospect in high school, who learned the harsh realities of now having a good head off his shoulders when going through being the equivalent of a celebrity as a teenager. Listen to this line from this article that talks about DJ's rise in high school hoops from his mother. He's been the #1 player in his class for the last year or two, and it means nothing to him, DJ's mother said on CBS Sports. His dad done a great job of keeping him grounded. These rankings mean nothing. It's a team sport. It's not an individual sport. He just wants to win. He doesn't care if he has to score 50 points or 5. As long as he gets to win, he never cared about the hype. And also listen to DeJuan Wagner's thoughts about the current culture today and how he makes sure he doesn't let that affect his son. As the article goes, DeJuan Wagner seen firsthand how the pressure, prospects ranking, and tidal waves of attention can affect the mentality of young players. He endured some of that at 16 and 17 years old too. They used to organize AAU showcases around the idea that a young DeJuan Wagner would show up and show out. It can poison them, DeJuan said. You have to mute that at home. That's not what it's about. It's about your team and winning games. All that ranking stuff doesn't matter much. Look at dudes in the NBA. Many of them weren't even ranked. There is an obvious contrast of these two prospects in their reputation and how they go about doing things. One's about the glitz, glamour, and notoriety, while the other is a kid who just wants to play ball, win, and be successful while blocking out all the outside noise that can potentially harm the development of a child. Because think about this, that's the exact reason why the NBA implemented the rule of not allowing high school players in the NBA anymore. They aren't mentally and sometimes physically ready for what's to come alongside all that stuff of being an NBA player in the first place. But as our culture has shifted further and further in the age of social media, we are now back to allowing kids to do adult things and stunt them in one way or another, especially in the NBA, but we're not fully there yet. I feel like it's going to take another 5 years before we start allowing high schoolers back in the NBA again. And again, it can be top players, players who are anomalies like in my video 2 years ago, just anyone who is able to make a profit and bring a company business.
After highlight, and now only kids watch highlights. They don't watch the actual basketball game, the purity of the game. You know, making a hockey pass, which means making the right pass. Even though you're not going to get an assist, you're driving to make a play so someone else can make the play to get an assist. You know, diving on the floor, talking on defense, playing defense at all, shooting good shots, making the game easy, being efficient with basketball, and scoring off 1 or 2 dribbles rather than 15 dribbles. This whole thing, and I only named like 12. There's 50 of them, has been forgotten about in basketball. And you're seeing it with some of these guys that come in the NBA. And I can name you names, but I'm not going to, that come into the NBA and have all the talent in the world, but like they need to be taught basketball because like this is what basketball is now. Like highlight culture has absolutely, it has killed the game.
And now let's get into what is possibly his biggest criticism of all of this, and that is the death of real basketball, and I couldn't agree more. Highlight culture has become a huge detriment in America in many ways, but I already talked about how the social media aspect is cooking up the brains of players everywhere, making players more selfish, less willing to be role players, and even though more talented, less versatile. But let's talk about the actual top product, the NBA, the National Basketball Association. Now in the NBA currently, we are seeing some of the most talented offensive basketball we have ever seen. More threes, more shot creation, more points, and more offensive-oriented basketball. But at the same time, we're seeing less defense, which I know is due to game plans, believe me, I know. Less hustle, and in many cases, less two-way players who are willing to play both offense and defense at a great level. But before I get into that fully, I want to add another little comparison by asking a question. When you think of the top NBA players currently in the NBA right now, at least as a consensus, who do you think of? Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, maybe even a Luka Doncic. Well, think about what they all have in common with each other. I'll give you a couple seconds. You ready? Cool. Okay. It is the fact that they are outside of the United States of origin. One of the things I believe is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, at least when it comes to the NBA, is the fact that more and more foreign players will come to the NBA and take over the top ranks. And it's because of simply the different cultures they come from. When you compare the game of an American player and a foreign player usually comes in a lot more well-rounded, more willing to play their role, and more team-oriented. And like Austin Rivers said, when you deal with these new age prospects that come into the league, the main thing you got to do with them is teach them how to play basketball the correct way, the right way, just more fundamentally sound way, which is in this case just team basketball. And he is not wrong. We see an immediate contrast to how the usual player plays depending on where they come from. Let's make an example of what we would call, well, what some people would call a win-win trade in the draft day of Trae Young and Luka Doncic. Coming into the NBA, Trae Young was considered to be a Stephen Curry clone with his long-range shots, being able to put up huge scoring numbers and making plays for his team all over the place, despite the lack of talent they had on the team and the record they showed for it at Oklahoma. Due to that, he was hailed as the top guard prospect in that year's draft, while on the other side of the pond, you had Luka Doncic, who at 18 was the MVP of the EuroLeague, what is considered to be the second best basketball league in the world, if not the first, depends who you talk to. But if you see the type of scenarios the both came from, you can see who was going to turn out to be better, at least from the eye test. Trae Young, who took very ill-advised shots from logo range, had the green light to do whatever he liked, while being slightly inefficient, which brings a question to his basketball IQ, and you can even see it in his game currently in the NBA. While Luka Doncic, who at 18 was playing in one of the hardest leagues in the world, was dominating with a lot of upside that can be tapped into if put in the right situation. But yet, we had people saying things like this about him just because of the fact that he didn't put up those type of highlights.
He may have, none of those things in the end matter. The only thing that matters is getting the best player. And while once upon a time, I was convinced that was clearly DeAndre Ayton, I am no longer convinced because of his performance in the tournament. Maybe I'm being a prisoner of the moment, but I saw things Stephen A. He's more athletic than Okafor. But like Okafor, may not be as ideally suited to the modern game, or the postmodern game, if you want to call it that, than some of the other guys in this draft. And I'm not talking about Doncic, who apparently doesn't react well to pressure on the ball. No, not great if he's going to be a primary ball handler. No, I'm not talking about either one of those guys. I look at guys like Jaren Jackson and Wendell Carter, and I see guys there that are more like the best players that have come out of the draft recently. You think about Jason Tatum, or even watching the Celtics, think about Al Horford. I see guys who can switch on screens, who play consistent and excellent, like ubiquitous defense. They're everywhere all the time. Long athletes. I see guys with, at least in Wendell Carter's case, some offensive polish too. And in both cases, real offensive upside. I see much more of the kind of modern kind of star than I do in either Ayton or Doncic, to tell you the truth. Though I haven't seen much of Doncic other than the video that, that we've all seen. The point is that I think when you have the #1 overall pick in the draft, it can hurt judgment at times because you think, okay, I got the #1 overall pick. Like, how often do you get this? Unless you're the Cleveland Cavaliers without LeBron. I better hit a home run with this pick. But sometimes there is no, home run or grand slam in the draft. Sometimes the best available pick, even at #1, is just a good double off the wall that scores 2 runs. If you consider Jason Tatum that, or someone like that. And I think Wendell Carter Jr. and Jaren Jackson Jr. fit that description, and I'd be afraid. I'm not saying you don't take Ayton #1. I just don't think
that the Phoenix Suns don't mess this up. He's right there in Arizona. He's right down the road. You need a box office attraction who can flat out ball, who's a big boy, the size, the athleticism, and the combination of all of those things with his gifts that you simply can't teach. I don't give a damn about how this kid in Europe looks. I understand he's a 6'8" point guard. He's surreal. He'll probably be the #2 overall pick. If it were anybody else, of course you take those things into consideration. But in Phoenix, considering the level of ineptitude that they have raked that city with in terms of its basketball product that they put out on the floor, DeAndre Ayton, there is nothing to think about. There is nothing to talk about. There is nothing to debate. There is absolutely nothing to consider. You have to take DeAndre Ayton with the #1 overall pick because you are the Phoenix Suns.
And I know that's only 2 examples. Luka Doncic's doubt was everywhere despite his dominance in the 2nd best league in the world. But again, Trae Young was the guy who created the sexy plays, the guy who made highlights for others than himself, the guy with the glamorous comparison to Stephen Curry due to his long-range action in Oklahoma. But that is just part of the life of being a foreign-born player. Less respect overall until you prove them wrong. But if you want to take this line of thought a step further, we could talk about how, again, the space between European athletes or just athletes outside of the US and American athletes is, again, creeping closer and closer, and it's easily been shown through the Olympics and FIBA. The 2004 and 2006 campaigns for the Olympics and the FIBA team proved that we as Americans have to treat other countries' basketball teams a little bit more seriously. Then after a very convincing campaign in 2008, 12, and 16, we then had the 2020 campaign, and that right there just showed me way too many things about American culture and sports that is starting to go downhill. In the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, it showed off the worst of the worst when it came to how we operate as Americans in sports, at least when it comes to the NBA. I can't say anything about anything else. I don't really watch that many other sports. What was once an opportunity for the best of the best to come together and represent their country turned into a drama-filled mess. Problem #1, the roster we made. In the last campaign, we had top stars like PG-13, DeMarcus Cousins before the injury, KD, Kyrie, Jimmy Butler, Melo, the list goes on. But 4 years later, that star-studded cast got turned into Keldon Johnson, JaVale McGee, Jeremy Grant, and Kyle Lowry, while having middling all-stars like Zach LaVine and Chris Middleton. And let's add some extra salt in the wound, where the only willing top superstar who wanted to come was Kevin Durant, who saved us multiple times during this campaign, by the way, and our only big man was Bam Adebayo. 6'9", Bam Adebayo. You can imagine how pissed I was watching this entire thing. Problem #2, no one really liked Greg Popovich that coached the team, because as we all know, Coach Pop wants to play team ball and have structure. But with a team full of guys who are the #1 option, a lot of them don't know how to do anything off the ball, at least in this current generation. And it showed during the Olympics so badly, as a lot of people were just standing in the corner waiting for an opportunity to get the ball and do something. And lastly, problem #3, you can easily tell that other teams in the other countries had real camaraderie and teamwork, while the Americans were just expecting it to be like a game of 2K My League, where you just had a bunch of good players and you can just win the championship so easily. Now, even though we still ended up winning gold off the backs of Kevin Durant, the old Olympic squads were full of stars who could play with each other. This one just showed what will again be the downfall of basketball in the States, as even its superstars don't care to even represent the country in the sport. While other countries are perfectly willing to play a role, you can point out to a lot of things that goes into the downfall of basketball in the States. There are probably even plenty of more I could talk about, but while we are only seeing the beginning of its effects now, it'll only get so much worse with the path we are falling down. Now, once again, we have seen many changes in the NBA world that have caused good and bad trends in the NBA, but I think this current one is only making things worse and even more worse. Now, I can acknowledge that there is some good in this movement. People can pay these companies for exposure to help their kid, or even in some cases, NBA players like Jason Preston, who used his mixtape to receive a scholarship from Ohio, and then used that opportunity to become an NBA player in the NBA draft. But that is the only good example out of many bad ones in the sea of controversy that this movement is causing. But I really do suggest you check out my video from a few years ago to get a good idea of what the true intentions of some of these companies are. Because as harmless as it seems to be on the surface, there is a real trickle effect that it will make on future generations of basketball players everywhere. But as always, I want to know your thoughts on this subject, because there is going to be plenty of dialogue on this issue online, as Austin Rivers went viral for calling it out. But as you all know, I would love to know what your feedback is towards it, because I read every comment and respond to the ones I can add on to. So leave your thoughts. But as always, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned something new, as my vision for this channel is to inform and, of course, entertain. Check out my social medias for the Inside Life of Alvini and other channel news. Check out my Twitch where I stream weekly, and my second channel where I post my streams. And lastly, if you want to talk to your boy, there is always my Discord. Links are in the description. With all that out of the way, this is your boy, Alvini Linguine, saying peace.